We're ready. Let's go.
All right, so thank you everyone for coming for this quick take session on neurodiverse marriage. We'd like to start by telling you who we are, what we do, and exactly what is a neurodiverse couple. Well, if you're wondering, it could be us. I'm Dan Holmes, and this is my wife, Dr. Stephanie Holmes, and we want to share a little bit of our story, introduce you to autism and marriage, and tell you about the importance of knowing about autism and adult autism and in the marriage relationship.
So I'll start with a short story of our family and origin of our work. By starting in a life that seems so long ago now, I was finishing up my master's in counseling at Liberty University. I was working on my licensure to be a licensed professional counselor. We were newly married, then minding my own business, kind of living the Christian American dream. I started my practice, we started having kids, and then our eldest child, who is now 24, was having difficulty in school. That's kind of where it all began. We went through a long 2-year process because apparently back then girls weren't on the spectrum, you know. So she went through a 2-year process and was diagnosed in 2005 and 2006. And what was then called Asperger's syndrome, and then was reassessed as a teenager as autism level 1. Life was challenging, as many of you know. Working with the school and the church was challenging, and our marriage was very challenging.
So while I was aware that our daughter's behaviors were certainly challenging and working with the school was challenging, I did not realize fully just how much struggle was going on in our relationship.
Yeah, I call that the tale of two marriages. Dan's marriage was going fine. It was going okay. Mine was not going okay. But I thought really the majority of our struggle was because we had 2 children with needs. The focus was so much on the needs. And I thought, well, that must be why we are having all the difficulty that we're having. So our oldest child, again, was on the spectrum, but then our second child came along after a very difficult pregnancy, and I had infertility and many miscarriages in between the 2 children. But in her toddler years, our youngest daughter was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, with hearing and speech challenges, and then later diagnosed with ADD and attentive type. So from kindergarten to 5th grade, our life was all about therapies, as many of you know, getting services, supports, IEPs, OT, PT, speech, counseling, and I was trying to have a private counseling practice as well. And that's what I thought was the gist of most of our marriage challenges.
So during that time when our oldest daughter was getting assessed, and we learned more about it as counselors and assessments came through, she would relate to me, you know, here's a quality, and at that time I would say something, well, I would think like that, or I might have done that, or some I might have kind of statement. She heard me as pushing back on the labeling process or just getting the diagnosis, but what was in hindsight was likely me just saying, you know, there's a pretty good chance.
Right, I was like, it's not about you, this is about her. What are you talking about? So fast forward, we moved from North Carolina to Georgia. And so what I did as a mom and as a counselor and type A person is whenever my daughter was about to transition to another stage of school, I would go to a conference about the next stage so I could be ahead, be well prepared and be proactive. So I was going to a seminar, this conference on kind of the next stages of life with autism, transitioning from high school to career, adults on the spectrum. And the speaker began giving all these descriptions of adults on the spectrum, and I made a face something like, to the point that the person giving the seminar said, and the lady on the second row has just identified her husband. And I was just so shocked, because how could I have missed this? I was a licensed professional counselor. I am a clinician. We just went through all of this criteria for our daughter, and we've known each other since we were 10 and 12 years old. So I know his childhood. I remember more of his childhood than he does. So I was so focused on our daughter and so focused just on all of the challenges and just thinking that our communication problems were just around all of the necessities of our life. I had no idea that I was in a neurodiverse marriage.
So while we came to learn and accept what was real about our marriage, I finally went and get an official assessment, and it turns out I was autism level 1. And what we realized that not many professionals understand what it's like to work in an autistic, in a neurodiverse marriage is not quite the same, and work in that. Just autism for counselors, clergy, and those folks, the helping professions, it is a little different. There is not the same treatment, and that's kind of what we do is bring awareness and training to that effect.
So I'll make a side note. When you think about children getting assessed, there's so many different ways for a child to be assessed in the school system. So educators can be trained, and school counselors, pediatricians, psychiatrists, licensed professional counselors, licensed social workers. All these different avenues for children to be assessed. And so you would think that people who know how to assess children would automatically know how to assess adults, but it's completely different in the adult world. So not everybody who is adept at assessing children are necessarily going to know what they're looking for when they're trying to assess an adult. If you think about, this is off topic, but it came to me to say, the DSM, when all of the criteria were normed and referenced, it was done on children. It was done on male children. And so we continue to have women that are missed, and we continue to not understand then what does adult autism look like when someone has grown up and had compensatory strategies. What does that look like in adulthood? And so that is being missed. So we are currently conducting some of the first research of its kind on neurodiverse Christian couples. There's only been research in the last 10 years on neurodiversity in marriage, and there's nothing about faith and autism in marriage. So in our current research, we asked 318 people, what do you want clergy and counselors to know about autism in marriage? And these are the top 5 or 6 themes that emerged. Tell them autism, now this is speaking to church folk, tell them autism is not a sickness, a disease, sin, or demonic influence. Some people have tried to cast their autism out. Please tell them to stop trying to pray my autism away. Please tell them if they do not understand autism in adults or marriage, don't do marriage work with them. And please know where to refer us to. We've heard tragic stories of abuse and neglect and poor advice that pastors not understanding the marital dynamics. We call this Sunday school advice. Pray more, submit more, go on more dates, just have more sex. So this is very insufficient, dismissive counsel for any couples, but especially for our neurodiverse Christian couples.
So here's some basic characteristics from an article Stephanie wrote for Focus on the Family. The article is called 3 Signs Your Spouse is on the Autism Spectrum. First of all, we need to break the myth that folks on the autism spectrum do not marry, and break the negative stigma of autism in the church. There are many reasons floating out there about the rise in autism rates. We like to quote research which comes from the JAMA Psychiatry Journal, July 17, 2019, the Association of Genetic and Environmental Factors with Autism in a 5-country cohort study. Yes, that's the entire title. This study had 2.1 million participants, and the findings were for autism level 1, autism without intellectual impairment. It found that there is an 80% hereditary factor.
So a trend I was seeing in my practice long before the study in 2019 is when a child or a grandchild was getting diagnosed or assessed and families were getting involved and we want to know more about this child or grandchild, more and more people started getting spotted on the family tree. As to autistic tendencies. So then parents and grandparents began to get diagnosed as well. And we're calling this the lost generation. So the DSM, Asperger's, and high-functioning autism came into being in the 1990s. So what about all the people before 1990 who got missed? So that's called the lost generation. We don't have time to go really deep into this topic like we would like to, so we want to invite you to come visit us at our table, as well as go to www.christianneurodiversemarriage.com. We have a podcast, which was mentioned, Neurodiverse Christian Couples. We interview professionals all over the world on the subject of autism, autism and faith, and autism in marriage. So we'll get back then to some of the overview or characteristics of autism in marriage.
So here's a few. Difficulty in interpreting what others are thinking or feeling, also known as theory of mind or mind blindness. Trouble interpreting facial expressions, body languages, and social cues. difficulty regulating emotion, which can be a shutdown or a meltdown. Our eldest daughter would struggle with meltdowns, and I'm more likely to shut down.
That just looks like quiet, going deep down into a place, a deep introverted place. There can be difficulty maintaining conversation, like in small talk, difficulty with emotional connection and intimacy, and conversations that are about emotions. So you can imagine that might be challenging in a marital situation where we want intimacy. There can be the preference for task and transactions over connection. And remember that restricted interest and passionate interest are our main criteria of being on the spectrum. Those don't go away when someone's an adult. It might not look like collections as much as maybe collecting research or books or knowledge. A common passionate interest for Christian adults on the spectrum might look like scripture memory, scripture reading, theology, special nuances in theology, like Bible languages or eschatology. It could be a focus on world politics and eschatology. And then some get really, really rigid on marital rules and the gender roles of marriage, and that can become quite problematic.
Additionally, there's all or nothing thinking, a strong need for routines and sameness, and also issues with executive functioning, such as planning, memory, and task completion.
So with all of those things that represent challenges, we like to work with the couples that we work with, giving them hope that, first of all, part of the answer might be in getting an assessment to see if one, sometimes both, spouses might be on the spectrum. So part of the work that we do, we start with education. What is autism and what is not autism? Part of education is just because someone has a label or a diagnosis, there's much more to any person than just a label or a diagnosis. There's your character, there's your personality traits, there's your temperament, there's your family of origin, there's your likes and your interest and your passion. And so starting that off, kind of starting the marital work off with a good assessment, and it's so important to go see someone, a clinician or a certified autism specialist who actually can and does work with adults. Because another thing from not just the lost generation, but especially if you live in the South or the Christian culture, how many times do you get told, look me in the eye, look me in the eye, give a firm handshake, look me in the eye? Well, someone over a couple of decades might learn how to look you in the eye or fake it after a little bit, because that's not a cool thing in church culture. It's very disrespectful to not give eye contact. So in addition to learning some things, there's compensatory strategies that people learn going into adulthood. So if the clinician is not sure what they're looking for when they're doing the assessment, they're going to see these compensatory strategies and say, well, quote, you don't have enough deficits, or your restrictive interest isn't weird enough. So most people on the spectrum go into a special interest like technology or STEM or engineering or theater. There are a lot of people in entertainment who are on the spectrum because of scripts and blocks and blocking. It works really great with the spectrum thinking. So while autism can be present in men and women, in part of the study that we're doing, we asked neurotypical wives with neurodiverse husbands, what attracted you in dating? So we're going to kind of talk about how did these folks meet, and then where did the challenges begin? So first of all, I then have to break the myth, because when I was in graduate school in the 1990s and Asperger's was entering the DSM, I was told I'd never see someone on the spectrum in my office. And I was told they'd never be in marriage counseling because people on the spectrum don't get married, and people on the spectrum prefer isolation. And back then, in the 90s, the autism rate was 1 in 10,000, and now the CDC is saying 1 in 36. And we've already told you there's a heredity factor, right? So a lot of things happened between the 90s and now. So how did a neurotypical woman and a neurodivergent man get together? Well, she said, he shows boyish charm, naivety, social immaturity, or awkwardness around me. He was quiet, shy, mysterious, reserved, stable, or honest. He was interested in me and went out of his way to show me he liked me, almost obsessed with me. He wasn't like the other guys. He was intelligent, smart, and cute in kind of a geeky way. I felt he would go very far in his line of work. I thought he'd be a good, stable provider, a good father, because he gets along with children. And he studied the Bible and prayed so much. I thought he might be a great spiritual leader.
And so the men said she was kind of kind or sweet. She praised and encouraged me, saw potential in me and things I didn't see, accepted me for who I was and how I was. She's bright and intelligent and can carry on a heady conversation, was fun and liked some of the same things that I did, but perhaps not as intensely.
Never with the same intensity. When things went a little challenging, I asked the neurotypical wives, what started happening? What causes the current challenges? How do you see things now? Different description from what they said in dating. I think he's rude, cold, and aloof. He only cares about himself. He's selfish. He can be embarrassing in social situations, and he doesn't even seem to care or notice. I feel like this was a bait or switch. As interested in me when we were dating, he ignores me now. He is so smart, but he's not seeming to progress at work. Or he's stuck in a rut and really not progressing in his job. He's even underemployed, and he has multiple degrees. He never seems to understand what I'm communicating. It's like I'm speaking another language. He would rather spend time in those obsessions and interests than spend time with me. I don't really feel I can rely on him. He doesn't follow through. I feel alone, isolated, rejected, devalued, and unimportant to him. Whenever I just try to have a conversation about how I feel, he's combative, shuts me out, says I'm nagging and criticizing, and just accuses me of attacking him. He reads his Bible all the time, but he never initiates prayer with me or the family.
And he would say in his thoughts, I thought she was kind and sweet, but now I can do nothing to please her. Why can't she say what she means? Why does she expect me to guess her thoughts? Why is my being direct and honest wrong? She says we don't connect or have intimacy, but I don't know what these words mean. I thought she knew and accepted my quirks, eccentricities, and nuances, but now she brings up how I need to change and how terrible of a person I am. She says, why can't you do this or that like so-and-so's spouse? I feel nagged, bullied, criticized, or attacked, and I wonder why bother trying? It doesn't really matter.
So when couples come to us, they're feeling not a lot of hope. They're feeling hopeless things, and usually this is because someone has not been diagnosed. So they don't understand that they're a neurodiverse couple. They don't know that there's autism. So all of these things that are happening for decades and decades are taken personally between the two people. And so there's a lot of water under the bridge. Now, in our research, I asked the couples, when did the marriage troubles begin? The answers tend to be split, but one of the themes was on the honeymoon. Sometimes the neurodivergent spouse was doing his own thing on the honeymoon and forgot the real reason they were there on the honeymoon. Some other statements were when they got home and started living together, because in the Christian faith we believe in abstinence, right? And we try not to live together before we're married. So the person really didn't know what the challenges of living together would look like. And then another big stress point is when the first child is born. And then oftentimes in the families we work with, the families that are struggling the most are neurodivergent marriages who also have one or more children on the spectrum. Then, without knowing about this autism for all of these years, the couples that we've worked with, I asked them how many counselors. Now, one had 13 plus, but the average number that counselors that they will see before someone identifies the autism is 5 to 7 counselors, usually tens of thousands into money spent. And when they went to see pastors, they got no help. So things began bleak, and sometimes pastors and counselors made things worse.
So we invite couples to accept their differences and lean into their strengths and reset expectations. So this is where it's important not to compare the neurodiverse couple to the neurotypical couple. Here's where religions, rules, and roles can become confusing if you're trying to get a couple to model their marriage after people that are neurotypical.
So we want couples to have hope that yes, your marriage might be different. It might have some challenges, but with education, you can be equipped. You're going to have to come up with some creative and different effective strategies, but it's most important to only seek help from coaches, counselors, and clergies who are trained in adult autism and neurodiverse marriage.
So we have some training at the International Association of Christian Neurodiverse Marriage and a podcast called Neurodiverse Christian Couples.
Thank you for the time that you've given us to share with you our story and to see a real live neurodiverse couple right in front of you.
Not taxidermy.
That's right. Remember, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. When you've met one adult on the autism spectrum, you've met one adult on the autism spectrum. Autism is expressed differently in males and females. Many non-diagnosed people have learned to mask to try to fit in to the neurotypical world. This makes identification a bit tougher, and usually people who are trying to mask and camouflage burn out, and now we're calling that autism burnout. So we're experiencing that in the marriage work that we're doing too. We hope to have our research available later this year so we can better equip the church and pastors in understanding neurodiverse marriage and family system.
So if you'd like to talk to us, we'll be at the table to answer questions, and we do have the handouts for this slide deck at that table. So for those of you that were taking pictures, they're also available on a piece of paper.
And we'll be there tomorrow and answering questions, and I have a workshop tomorrow morning on another big thing on gender identity and autism, and I'll wait after there and take questions for you as well. Thank you very much for your time.